Gears within a servo are a potential wear item or point of failure, so instead of throwing out your servo, I'm going to show you how to change the gear set. For a few dollars, many times you can get a replacement gear set from the manufacturer, and they're fairly easy to change. If you have a horn on the servo, go ahead and take it off at this time, and then you're going to find 4 case screws on the back side of the servo. If it's a high-end servo, sometimes there are 2 additional case screws located on the top and going down into the main case. In order to access the gears inside, let's go ahead and take the top of the servo off. To do that, I usually apply a small amount of pressure with my thumb on the output spline and then pull up on the mounting tabs, and the top should just pop right off. Now, this can be a little bit daunting the first time you see all the gears inside of a servo, so if you have a cell phone, go ahead and take a picture of it. That way you know exactly where all the gears go. That will help in replacing them with a new gear set. Once you've taken the top off your servo, it's time to remove the old gears. Now, if you can see right away that you have a broken tooth, you can go straight to that gear and you can replace it with one of the replacement gears out of the set. But it's probably the best practice to go ahead and replace all of the gears at one time. That way, if any other gears are worn, they can be replaced, and the gears that mesh can all wear together. I'm going to start by taking off the largest gear. When I take the gears off, I just go ahead and place those in the same order that they come out. And then in the case of the final gear, sometimes you'll have to remove the shaft if it's still in the case. Once the old gears are removed, it's time to go ahead and install the new ones in the reverse order. I'm going to start with the gear that mates with the motor down inside of the servo and slide that into place, and then pin it in place with the shaft that you'd taken out. And then just kind of work your way back and forth as you go in the reverse order of what you took it apart in. It's important that when you install a gear, you need to make sure it's all the way down and meshed properly with the next gear. You can see that this didn't slide in place quite right. So sometimes you'll want to just put a little sideward pressure on the shaft that the other gear is mated to in order to get those down properly. And then I always spin them just a little bit to make sure they're going to mesh properly after I install them. Now the final gear on a servo is probably the trickiest one of the bunch because there are a few things that you need to pay attention to. Number one, you can see that the stock gear, when it came out, it kept the bearing on the top. That's the support mechanism for it. So we'll need to transfer that bearing over to the new gear. And sometimes if they don't slide off very easily, you can grab a pair of pliers and slide those pliers under the bearing and then set that across the vise and just tap lightly on the top of the output shaft until that bearing comes off. In the case of the 485, this just has one bearing. In a higher end servo, you'll find a second bearing down on the bottom side where the potentiometer mates, so you'll need to take that bearing out if it didn't stay with the case. Sometimes when you take them apart, the bearings will stay with the case itself, so you don't have to worry about pulling the bearing off. So I'm going to take the top bearing and push it down on the new gear. Make sure it's down all the way. And then the other two things you need to pay attention to, number one is the slot in the bottom side of the final gear. That slot is going to mate with the potentiometer in order to give this servo feedback. And number two is the mechanical stop. On the top side, you'll see a mechanical stop molded into a plastic gear set. If it's a metal gear set, it's going to be a pin that's been pressed into place. You'll want to make sure that when your servo rotates, it rotates that mechanical stop away from the rest of the gear train. So you make sure that you have this in the correct orientation. So in order to put this in place, I usually lift the gear that it mates to and just slide it under and wiggle it back and forth until it aligns with the potentiometer shaft press it down until it's all the way in place. You'll finish up by applying a little bit of grease to these gears. Hi-Tech offers a grease set that you can buy. And then once you've got them greased up, just put your top back on the servo and then put your case screws back in and your servo horn on, and you're ready to use your servo again.